Good incentives when I need to adopt. Uh, well, welcome everybody, task force members, of course, but also any members of the public who are watching. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your continued efforts to improve our criminal justice system. The agenda is full, but there are 2 or 3 updates I'd like to give before we get into the meat of the agenda. First, it has to do with our survey and model policy project. This is an initiative that the task force is undertaking, and we've sent surveys out. We sent surveys to all district and superior court district judges 2 weeks ago. And so far, we've already gotten 29 responses, 16 from superior court judges, 13 from district court judges, and we definitely want to express our gratitude to Judges Clark and Thornburg for their leadership on this whole effort and for reaching out to judges to encourage them to participate. We also sent a survey to law enforcement agencies across the state and have received 29 responses to date, and we're working to increase the number of responses just so the data we get back will be richer. Once we get all the surveys, the next phase of this initiative is to start drafting a model set of policies or information sheets that we can then share with the appropriate or relevant agency, whether it's a law enforcement agency, a prosecutor, or a court, on how to effectuate some of the recommendations we've made. And so when it comes time to either drafting or refining these model policies, please, members of the task force, we very much want your input and participation so that we can make them as effective as possible. There is going to be, if there isn't already, in the chat, a link to a survey, and make sure that you click it open now before we get out of the Zoom and you can't find it again, although we can email it around to everybody as well. But just take some time to fill out the survey to express your interest in participating on this model policy initiative. Another request for you that is part of the same survey that you'll be looking at has to do with an idea that came from the local policy committee. And it has to do with outreach and policy implementation in local communities across the state. We are creating what we're calling a regional speaking team, which will be comprised of anywhere from 2 to 4 members of the task force that will either respond to speaking requests, or we can help initiate various speaking requests in various regions across North Carolina, depending on where you live. And this happened because we sort of had one develop and it worked out well. And we thought, well, hey, why don't we take this show on the road? And so that's what this is. If you could, be sure to answer the questions in the survey about your interest and willingness to participate with regional speaking teams. And then Secretary Hooks told me he had another meeting at exactly the same time as this. And so I'm just seeing, doing an ask if he's been able to join. He said he was going to try to join late. Secretary Hooks, are you on yet? Okay. Well, I will update you all in case you haven't heard, but he has announced his retirement as Secretary of the Department of Public Safety. He has put in, I think, 4 or 5 years beyond his retirement and said it's time. And he has done yeoman's work in what is obviously an incredibly complex and massive department in state government. And so he's not only done that incredible work, but he has been an invaluable member of our task force. And we will definitely miss him and wish him all the best on his retirement. And when he, if he's able to make it, we'll try to embarrass him later on when he gets on. And with that, I will hand it over to my fellow co-chair, Justice Earls.
Thank you very much. I first want to thank all of you who are here this morning with us, and of course, I really want to make sure everyone knows how grateful I am to the staff who have just been continuing to work so hard and accomplishing so much. And also, I note that we have a lot of attendees who are folks who kind of become engaged with our work through some of the committees. And so to all of you, really, I really want you to know how much your efforts are being noticed, acknowledged, and greatly appreciated. I want to just take a couple minutes to tell you about a couple of things you may not be aware of, and those are other events that the task force is participating in, sponsoring, and I call these change catalyst events. That's how I think of them, and I really see them as part of our implementation work. But there's been two types of events. So the first we're calling learning sessions, and the goal here is to continue to explore, maybe look deeper at some of the issues that we initially were examining in the first 6 months before our initial set of recommendations came out, and both with the goal of potentially seeing are there additional things we need to recommend, but also broadening a conversation amongst stakeholders, researchers, the community folks around some of these issues. So the first one, our first learning session already happened. Professor April Dawson moderated a conversation with Brandon Garrett and Arvind Krishnamurthy about the whole issue of data and racial justice implications of law enforcement's adoption of data analytics and how that impacts policing decisions. Our next learning session is coming up Thursday, August 26th at 6 p.m. And that is an exploration of the, I think, both asking the question, are there ways in which when African Americans and people of color are victims of crime, they may have a different experience of the criminal justice system? And then are there ways that the system can better be more responsive to their needs? And I learned yesterday from another session I'm about to tell you about, to me, what was a surprising statistic. This is national data, but in 2016, 75% of people in this country who died from gun violence were people of color, which I think just kind of highlights that when we're looking at the issue of racial equity in the criminal justice system, the racial equity of victims and how they're treated is also really important. So stay tuned to that. And if you have ideas for other learning sessions that we should be organizing, other issues we should be looking more closely at, please let us know. The other type of events we've been having are the American Rescue Plan technical sessions, and recognizing that ARP funds are available at the local level, that there's real overlap between the recommendations of this task force and what the ARP mission and purpose of those funds is. We've had over 100, there are 3 sessions planned. We've had 2 already, over 100 people attending each of the 2 that we've already had. One focused on law enforcement responses to mental illness, substance abuse, other types of, so the co-responder models, how those could be started at the local level. And then yesterday we had a session on the issue of crime or violence prevention. And had some really great presentations from a program in Virginia, a program in Durham. And so those sessions are recorded and there are links to them on our website. They're only an hour long, but basically what we're trying to get out is to the community folks, both nonprofits as well as city and county governments, how they can use ARP funds to fund these programs at the local level. So again, huge kudos to the staff for organizing this, getting great presenters and getting that information out. Our third and final session will be next Tuesday, July 20th at 12 p.m. And there we're gonna look at diversion programs to prioritize public safety and promote alternatives to arrest. And I think with that, those are all the events I can tell you about right now, but I do think this has been incredibly valuable.
Thanks, Anita. Yeah, really enjoyed the I missed the second one, but I did the first of the American Rescue Plan technical session. And it was great. It was great for two reasons. One is there was so much participation and interest, but it was also just great substantively to learn what's going on in different corners of the state, because there are so many positive initiatives happening. And I encourage, even if you're not in a position to use American Rescue Plan dollars, it is a very informative exercise. So you also feel free to join us on our last one, which is next Tuesday. Okay, the next item on the agenda is to hear from each of the committees and hear what their prioritization and goal setting has been, how it's been going and what they're working on. And I will go in numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we'll start with committee 1. And Billy, are you on to talk about the executive branch action?
He is not. He actually had to go to a funeral in Tennessee, so he's not here today. So I'm going to be covering for him today.
Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate that.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. The update from the Executive Branch Action Committee. Essentially, as y'all will recall, we have several different what we've called buckets of responsibility: policy, training, prisons, and commissions. Most of the policy recommendations have been subsumed in our other work that has been going on in the other buckets. And in our training area, we are working with the Justice Academy to get the new trainings on formulated and online, and have been coordinating closely with them on that. So that work is ongoing. Also, there'll be a survey going out shortly for school resource officers and other school personnel who will be asked to respond, so that we can then use that data in the working group to work on school resource officer training recommendations. So those things will be happening in the near future. With respect to the prisons bucket, our prisons folks, Mike Deniska has been doing a lot of work with our group. And if Secretary Hooks hops on, I'll have him give any updates that he feels I have missed. But basically in the prisons bucket, they have reformed investigations. So for all of our statewide agencies, they have reformed some of the policies surrounding traffic stops and consent searches. With respect to their use of force policies, there are now policies in place spanning chokeholds and requiring a duty to intervene for all state officers, in addition to establishing early warning systems, early warning intervention systems for all state officers. They have made enhancements in the area of victim services within the prisons. They have received a racial equity training grant for their juvenile justice officers, and they'll be implementing that, and essentially are working on ongoing efforts on all of the rest of the track recommendations. So I think that our prisons bucket is in a good space moving forward. But I wanted to spend the most of the time today talking about our commissions bucket, because I think that we have some things that are coming up in August that hopefully we can get some movement on, and have had some recent movement in that area. With respect to the commissions, when we divided out the track recommendations, there were 3 basic areas for action. The first was code revisions to the North Carolina Administrative Code. The second was different policy recommendations that we want to ask the commissions to implement. And then the third was a best practices area in terms of what kind of best practices documents we need for the state, and what the task force has recommended that the commissions get involved in implementing. So I'll talk first about the administrative code revisions. If I could have the next slide, Ellen. Essentially, with respect to the minimum standards, the biggest revision that we have asked for the commissions is to revise the minimum standards for the profession. And we have done that by proposing to the commissions the addition of language that officers not engage in excessive or unjustified use of force or abuse of power of the position. Now, in order to accomplish this, the commissions would have to define both the use of force and the abuse of power, or some combination thereof. So we would need to make sure that the parameters are clear. But by revising the minimum standards, that also allows the commissions to suspend, revoke, or decertify officers when they are in violation of this particular part of the minimum standards. The section of the administrative code that refers back to the decertification, it refers back to the minimum standards. And so by changing minimum standards, we also change the ability to suspend, revoke, or decertify officers for this reason. So that's a pretty big change. I think that we are going to be able to accomplish that in some way, shape, or form, I hope, through the commissions. Also asking them to consider repeating psych evaluations after either a certain number of years or before promotion, and then requiring notification by both the officer and the agency of specific use of force incidents. Again, that's going towards that transparency that we have asked and sought after from this task force to the commissions. With respect to these revisions and the actions that we're going to take, we have just recently in the past 2 commission meetings solicited volunteers for an advisory group that will span both commissions, both the Criminal Justice Education and Training Standards Commission and the Sheriff's Commission, and will be made up of members of both commissions to start working on specifically these track recommendations. And so when I presented all of these ideas to the CJ Commission back in May, it was met with a lot of really positive feedback on the part of the commission members. I chair the Planning and Standards Committee. I sit on the CJ Commission as the Attorney General's designee. And as the chair of Planning and Standards, we have the opportunity through that committee to raise new issues, raise new code revisions. That's where we do the code, have the code hearings for the commission. And so it's a good place to start with this. With respect to the members of the advisory committee, Chief Blue, who many of you know is the police chief in Chapel Hill, he is also the chair of the CJ Commission, has been very supportive and positive about these efforts, and so has generated this advisory group with members from the CJ Commission, who include Chief Hassel, who's the new chief in Rocky Mount, Chief Patterson, who's the new chief in Raleigh, who she came to us originally from Charlotte, but then is now new chief in Raleigh, Commissioner Andy Hendry, Eddie Caldwell, Stephanie Freeman, Trevor Allen from the Justice Academy, and then Commissioner Tracy McPherson, who is our representative for the community college system. So we have a good variety of commissioners from CJ to bring different perspectives to this advisory group for the TREC recommendations. And then I also presented in June to the Sheriff's Commission. And the Sheriff's Commission also met these recommendations with positive feedback. I think we had a good discussion about parameters and about how we would get started looking at these issues and how we would come together on areas of agreement specifically to start first. And then several sheriffs volunteered to be a part of this joint working group also. Sheriff Oliver out of Yadkin County, Sheriff McMahon from New Hanover, Sheriff Smith from Northampton, Sheriff Ingram from Brunswick, and then Sheriff Dowdy from Dare. So I think that we have a good number of sheriffs and also a good number of CJ members who will work on this group. The work of the advisory group will move forward in the next couple of weeks. Chief Blue and I have been coordinating about getting the first meeting on the books, but I think that what will happen is we'll focus on 2 main areas. One group of these advisory group members will focus on the code revisions and ensuring that the code provisions between sheriffs and CJ are also consistent, which right now they are not consistent. And that was one of the task force recommendations, to make the 2 consistent, especially for minimum standards for all criminal justice officers in the state. And then the second part of this advisory group, I think, will really start to work on the best practices recommendations in 2 particular areas. One, we want to come out with best practices for facilitation of peaceful demonstrations. And then the second is for the development of best practices for recruitment and retention into the profession. And both of those are aligned with TREC recommendations. I think the idea being that we will have members of the advisory group who will spearhead the effort, and then we'll reach out to other stakeholders in the community to get involved with the commissions in drafting those documents, so that they won't be simply commission drafted documents. It'll just be that the commissions are kind of spearheading the effort to gather stakeholders together, including members of the community, to talk about facilitation of peaceful demonstrations, which I think is particularly important and was raised by several commissioners when we were discussing this way forward. So we have a plan. In addition to that, because of the way our rules have worked out for this coming meeting, which is in August for the CJ Commission, we don't have that many rules on for hearing. And so we have some time in our agenda where we will be able to really focus on discussing the TREC recommendations and the way forward. So I'm excited about being able to dedicate a lot of that time to the discussion of these issues and what the advisory group starts to work on for these issues. Because I think that and I know we don't like to use the term low-hanging fruit, so I'll say there are some relatively quick fixes or quick responses that we can have in the commission to some of these issues. And some, I think, as you know, we'll have to wait to see what happens in the legislature in the coming months also, particularly those that relate to mandatory in-service training and the changes there. I think the commission can't act until we know what the legislature is going to mandate, and then the commissions can come on the back end and determine what we need to do to follow up on that. So I think that will be kind of a second phase after we figure out where the legislation ends up. The commissions can then, through this advisory group, come in and fill those gaps and figure out where we need to be on the rest of the TREC recommendations. So overall, really positive response from the commissions. I'm really excited about the direction that it's moving, and I think that we're going to get some good stuff done here in the coming months. So that is the basic update, unless anybody's got any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Leslie? Well, that's all exceptionally encouraging, Leslie. Thank you. Thank Chief Blue, thank the commission for their engagement on these issues. This is just for the information of the task force. The current director of the CJ Standards Commission staff, which is a group of about 20 people within the Department of Justice, and they are the folks who carry out the work of the commission. There is a vacancy in that position, and the previous director has moved over to DPS. Secretary Hooks, one of his last acts was to steal one of my people. I won't hold that against him, but we are in the process of filling that, and whoever comes into that position will be an ally with the members on and Committee 1 on trying to work with the commission to try to adopt as many of these recommendations that we have identified that are appropriate for the executive branch, and you all are just doing a great job, Leslie. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to Committee 2 unless anyone has any other questions or comments on Committee 1. Committee 2, Sam, are you presenting on the judicial branch?
Yeah.
Okay, great. How about
Hey, everyone. So I think just a brief update from Committee 2 here, and Ellen or Allison, someone, thank you. And yeah, great, thanks. So I think the most significant update we have since our last full task force meeting is around the recommendations that fall within the kind of broad category of fines and fees, ability to pay. And so there are three kind of initiatives that we're excited that we've worked to develop over the last few months and will be rolling out soon. So the first I want to talk about is the training. So we, working with the School of Government, have developed a training for both judges and clerks to help people think kind of holistically about the issues surrounding the imposition of fines and fees, and really to help folks better understand kind of how to exercise their authority to impose fines and fees in a manner that's consistent with statutory requirements, but really also recognizes kind of the fairness and equity issues, and also the significant discretion that judges have to tailor the imposition of fines and fees. And so we're really excited. I think this is the first time I'm announcing this, but we're really excited. The first training has been scheduled for mid-September, I believe the 16th and 17th, be hosted at the School of Government. And I think we're aiming to have 5 judicial districts be a part of that training. And we know, based on feedback we've gotten and conversations over the past few months, that there's a lot more of an appetite for that training. And so our goal will be to kind of roll that out and then expand it as we can. But we're really excited for that. And also really excited, I think one thing we heard was that it's important to involve both judges and clerks, so that this is something that's really kind of integrated into their workflow, during court. And so we're really excited for that, and I'm sure we'll have more as we learn from that initial training. Another aspect we've been working on within this bucket is the form. And this is the form for defendants to motion for waiver of fines and fees. And I think some of the feedback we've received in conversations with various stakeholders is that the existing form is a little unwieldy. It makes it kind of difficult to provide information. The information is not necessarily that specific or useful. And so again, working with the School of Government, we've developed a streamlined form, and we'll be thinking about how to roll that out. But we think, this is something that's tailored specifically to what we've heard from people who are using this. And so we're hopeful that that will just make it easier for people to seek relief from fines and fees. And then finally, on this one, we're also developing a model bench card. So again, this is for judges, and it helps. I think the idea is that by having a single source of information that highlights the various considerations that should go into imposing fines and fees, it will reduce the reliance on fines and fees, and it will just reduce the risk that we will be imposing fines and fees that are just never going to get paid off. And again, we'll be working with the School of Government, with other folks to roll that out, and kind of hopefully that will be a way to make some progress on this issue. At the same time, we're continuing to advocate for other ways of addressing this issue. So thinking about adopting rules, or we're going to have a meeting with the Legislative Committee next week to talk about different strategies for pursuing some reforms through legislation. So we're really excited about the progress that's being made here. We're also, so this last one, drafting formal guidance on mass relief. Mercedes, I can speak a little bit to this, but Mercedes, if you want to jump in. So this, we have heard from here. Yeah, Mercedes, do you want to? Sorry, if you're, yeah.
Yeah, no problem. We are working with folks that are already working in this arena. The NC Pro Bono Center, I believe is the full title, on replicating the projects that are already out there. The Deer Clinic and other examples that have happened throughout the state have done these kind of expunction and mass relief efforts. And so we are looking at formalizing that in a standardized guidance and hopefully targeting different jurisdictions that are interested, and similar to the training that we're doing with fines and fees rolling out, and identifying pilot jurisdictions that are wanting to replicate those mass relief programs.
Yeah, thanks, Mercedes. Yeah, and I think the idea here is, like with a lot of the recommendations, there's already really great stuff happening in North Carolina, and we see part of our function as a task force as kind of spotlighting it and scaling it across the state. And so some of that, I think in the next phase, it sounds like, is around developing kind of guides for how to do this. But I think then using those guides to do outreach and kind of talk about why this is so important. And
exactly. And as you mentioned, working with the clerks as well, because we know that in addition to DAs doing the work, this creates a much larger bulk of work for clerks. And so making sure that they're trained and on board.
Great. So then moving on, so we also have a set of recommendations that are kind of within the prosecutorial bucket. And we're continuing to think through how to best make progress on those. So I think on the prosecutor related recommendations, the survey and model policy project excuse me, is going to be really important. And we should hopefully be rolling out that survey shortly. And the goal there will be to get a sense for what individual districts are doing, what their needs are, what there's an appetite for already. And then we can use that information to do kind of targeted outreach and working with individuals to implement the various recommendations which fall within that bucket. And then the final thing I'll just mention is on school justice partnerships. We were really excited, I guess it was a month or two ago, to hear about Chief Justice Newby's task force on adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And we think there's just a tremendous amount of overlap between the kinds of issues they're targeting and at least some of the issues that fall within our juvenile justice recommendations. And particularly, we think school justice partnerships are just a really ripe area for making progress. This is one where we know there are a lot of districts that have already started implementing school justice partnerships. And we think as schools are getting back to normal this summer and fall, this is just a really good opportunity to use that momentum to kind of accelerate our progress towards implementing school justice partnerships statewide. So we have reached out and are looking to partner closely with the ACEs task force on these issues. And hopefully we'll have some public events and some trainings for that coming in the fall.
That's great, Sam. Thank you. Anyone else on the Judicial Committee want to offer comment, or does anyone have any questions for Sam?
Can I offer two additional updates?
Sure.
So and these both relate to fines and fees, but I just want everyone to know that there continues to be, I think, really broad support for the types of recommendations that the task force has made. I attended both the Superior Court Judges Conference and the District Court Judges Conference. And I would say it seemed clear to me this was particularly of urgent concern to some critical mass of the district court judges across the state. Both kind of how can they effectively assess the ability to pay? They don't want to be fining and then seeing back in front of them time and again because they can't pay. People who just, as one judge put it, I'm not going to take food out of a kid's mouth to pay fines and fees. So I think we need to be aware of that and try to continue to make use of that because they're the folks sort of on the front lines seeing the impacts of these fines and fees in their courtrooms. And then the other thing I want to say about fines and fees is one of our earliest recommendations was that the Supreme Court adopt a rule to a procedural rule that would require consideration of ability to pay before imposing a fine or fee. And just to report to you that is the effort to have in front of the court consideration that rule is ongoing. But it is also slow moving, so I don't anticipate the court will have this before it to consider before mid to late fall. But just, I think you all should know that is still in the works. And to the extent that that you come across information or anything that's useful to explain why a rule in the general rule of practice would be useful along these lines, I think we continue to want to know about it. So I wanted to raise those.
Great. Thank you, Justice. Anyone else on Committee 2 or about Committee 2? All right, great. We will move to Committee 3, the legislative action. And Bradford, are you presenting?
Yeah, I'm going to have Bradford. This is Tally. I'm enjoying my vacation in Maine by being with you, but I'm going to have Bradford do the report out and then turn it over to Representative Morey and Senator Mohammed if they have things to add or anybody else from the committee.
Well, Tally, thank you for checking in while on vacation. We appreciate that. Great. Thanks so much.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Want to give everybody a quick update on the status of how things are going with the legislature in terms of our basically 25 recommendations that we picked to be top priority for this session. As you may remember, we kind of distilled all our recommendations down to a top 25 and put them in 5 different buckets. Those buckets were law enforcement recruitment and training, law enforcement practices and accountability, decriminalization, juvenile justice reform, and courts and jails. So I'd like to go through each bucket and give you an update on where these things are. For law enforcement recruitment and training, one of those items, recommendations, was Criminal Justice Fellows Program. And I'm proud to say that was fully funded in Senate Bill 105. And in Senate Bill 105, they expanded the program to counties with less than 200,000 people, as opposed to where it is currently with 125,000 people. Obviously, we are advocating for it to be statewide and not selective to just those counties, but that work continues, waiting to see what the House does in their budget. The second item is making it easier to revise training topics for the commission. And that provision can be found in Part 12 of Senate Bill 300, which would exempt in-service training standards from the rulemaking process. So there was good progress there in that bill. The third thing under the law enforcement recruitment and training bucket is update mandatory and service training. And in Part 11 of Senate Bill 300 will expand mandatory and service training to include 5 additional topics. And those were community policing, minority sensitivity training, use of force, duty to intervene and report, and mental health. Another big item that we were pushing for was for the commissions to develop and disseminate a best practice guide. That also is in Senate Bill 300 in Part 9, and it requires the commissions to develop a best practice guide for recruitment and retention and diversity. The fifth thing under this bucket is mental health screenings and requiring those for officers that are joining employment or just being certified for a new employment in a different division or different agency. And that is also part of Senate Bill 300. Under the law enforcement practices and accountability bucket, one of the big topics that we were trying to see movement on was the duty to intervene. And I'm proud to say that that is actually found in Part 16 of Senate Bill 300, and it requires law enforcement officers to intervene and report excessive uses of force by a fellow law enforcement officer. Early warning and intervention systems, I know Leslie touched on this from the commission side. That's actually found in legislation in Part 8 of Senate Bill 300, and it requires LEAs to create an early warning system within each agency to monitor officers' actions and behaviors. And it includes 4 topics or 4 areas, 1 being discharging of a firearm, 2, use of force, 3, vehicle collisions, and 4, citizen complaints. The third bucket is reforming investigation and prosecution procedures for officer-involved use of force incidences. This is interesting. So it's in actually 2 different places in bills. One is the Senate budget. It's found in section 19B.3a. And this would require the SBI to investigate at the request of the governor, the sheriff, or chief of police, DA, when any of these 3 things occur. 1, if an officer discharges the gun in the line of duty, officer uses force against an individual that results in death or serious bodily injury, and 3, an individual in custody of prison or jail is seriously injured or dies. Something to note here, in Senate Bill 300, as it moved over from the Senate to the House, removed the requirement to investigate serious bodily injury and just left deaths. So I certainly would like to work to try to get the serious bodily injury language back in either Senate Bill 300 or have it enacted within the Senate's budget, because I think that's very important. One thing that's not part of that legislation is requiring a special prosecutor in times where an officer-involved use of force incident occurs. Still trying to work on that, but was not able to kind of get agreement with the Sheriff's Association and the Chiefs of Police Association, but still having those conversations. But it's certainly something I think we'll have to address at a later time, because I think basically the window may be closed on that recommendation for this session. The use of force definition and data collection. Part 3 of Senate Bill 300 would require DOJ to create a database for use by law enforcement agencies to include any use of force that results in death or serious bodily injury. All state and local law enforcement agencies, as well as campus police and company police, will be required to provide information to DOJ on critical incidences. One thing that we were trying to push for was a uniform use of force definition and statute and could not get agreement around what that actually would be on the legislative side. But as Leslie noted, that's something that the commissions can certainly take up and help with. Body worn and dashboard cameras and increased access to the footage. The recommendation was for mandatory use and allow release of the footage to citizen oversight boards within 45 days unless a court finds that release would compromise the investigation. Senate Bill 300 did have a provision that would allow the release to the family within 5 days of request to the law enforcement agency. And if the law enforcement agency objected, it would be then sent to the court for a judge's decision. This was changed when the bill moved over to the House to almost flip it so that the law enforcement agency, when the request was made by the family, the agency then would immediately petition the court for a decision. And through extensive debate in J2 in the House, the entire provision has been pulled. I know that a lot of folks are working behind the scenes to get the original body camera language back in and release the footage. I should say release the footage language back in, but that's a work in progress. So as of right now, there's not a provision that addresses release of that footage. The seventh thing that we were working on in this bucket was the Ratback Program and wandering officer issues. And Senate Bill 300 does require the commissions to run candidates through the National Decertification Database before being certified. It's found in Part 15 of Senate Bill 300. And then it gets into the Ratback provision where it requires and implements a process for all law enforcement officers to provide their fingerprints to the SBI so they can be put into this federal database, and that would alert our commission if that officer was arrested or prosecuted for a crime. Public safety and violence prevention grants. That's not something that's found in Senate Bill 300, but it is lightly touched on in House Bill 786. 786, which is still in House rules, would create a pilot program that would provide grants to local law enforcement in order to enhance responses to mental health crises. In terms of moving that forward, I think it's a little late in the game to probably get that to the finish line this session, but certainly something to remember to work on when the short session occurs. The next bucket is decriminalization. And Senate Bill 300, Part 13, does limit local ordinances that may impose a criminal penalty and provides a compliance defense for certain defenses. One thing that was left out, we're not able to get language around decriminalization of marijuana of up to 1.5 ounces, which is something I know that a lot of folks were hoping for, and was certainly something we continue to kind of work on, but just could not get consensus around that with our law enforcement stakeholders. And another new provision that's found in Senate Bill 300 as it was presented in the House was it does create a working group on criminal law recodification. Now, I know that doesn't exactly touch on the study of class 3 misdemeanors that can be decriminalized, but I feel like that does open the door to have that conversation, to maybe have some language tweaks that would allow this working group to address that. So I think there's an opportunity there. Diversion courts and specialty courts, that was addressed in the Senate budget, 16.5A. It does provide funding and a pilot recovery court program in Harnett, Pitt, Haywood, Robeson County, Onslow, and Wayne County. So touched on there, resources are there. Would like to see it certainly expanded, but feel like good momentum there that's being addressed in the Senate budget. We'll see what the House budget does. In terms of juvenile justice reform, that was our next bucket. And getting into raise the age from 6 to 12, that was our recommendation. Couldn't get it to 12, but in Senate Bill 207 with Senator Muhammad and Representative Moray's hard work, was able to raise it to age 10. So 6 to age 10 is the current language in Senate Bill 207, and that bill has made it all the way to House rules where it sits now, and will hopefully get to the floor soon. The second recommendation under that bucket was allow prosecutors to accept pleas in juvenile court. Senate Bill 207 allows prosecutors to accept pleas for offenses that would be classified as a D, E, F, or G felony. Getting into courts and jails. One, allowing DMV to waive fees and license suspensions. Again, thank you to Senator Mohammed for his hard work on this bill. Senate Bill 490, which made it through the Senate, voted on, I think, unanimously, is in the House, and it allows DMV to waive restoration fees on a finding by the Commissioner of Good Cause for the inability to pay. It also requires DMV to lift revocations for failure to appear 12 months after the revocation if the person has proof of insurance and the revocation was not due to a DWI. Requiring first appearances within 48 hours. That was a big recommendation coming from the task force that we wanted to see implemented. Could not get 48 hours, but in Senate Bill 300 Part 14, it's been reduced to or set at 72 hours. And then the last recommendation to touch on there is the dealing with pregnant people in prison. And that is certainly something that's still being debated in the Senate. It has not moved out of Senate rules. I know there's behind the scenes conversations with some of the House partners, but that's found in House Bill 608. And would like to see movement on that, and we'll provide an update at a later date. I think that will move soon. So that in a nutshell is everything that we've seen movement on or has been addressed by the General Assembly this session. I will point out there are several things that I think are very important that are missing. I touched on the appointment of a special prosecutor for officer-involved use of force incidences. Another one that jumps out to me is the chokehold ban. Working with the Sheriff's Association to try to find some agreed upon language on how that's actually define how you define chokehold. Can't really seem to get agreement right now, but I've been working with Marie Evett and Eddie Caldwell on this, and I feel like we could get to a point we can agree. Just it's a matter of working with different definitions and getting something that we can all stand behind. I talked about decriminalization of marijuana not being addressed. Eliminating cash bail for class 1, 2, 3 misdemeanors. That has not been addressed this session. The court reminder system with AOC was addressed in Senate Bill 300, and that actually was taken out when the bill made it over to the House and the PCS. And according to AOC, that somehow runs afoul of federal law, and I don't have much clarity other than that, but that's why that was pulled. And then the other recommendation, making juries more representative, that was not addressed this session so far, but certainly something that's very important. So I know that's a lot of stuff to run through. Happy to answer any questions. Representative Morey, Senator Mohammed, feel free to jump in as well.
Sure. Hey, thank you so much, Bradford, Attorney General Stein, and Justice Searles. Thank you so much for your all's leadership. I just want to begin by you all heard a lot of the progress that we've made. It's not perfect, but thankfully we're moving in the right direction, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to work with Representative Morey, Representative Galliard. We've had some amazing input from folks like the ACLU and the Justice Center also helping us. So we're so thankful for everyone. But I want to thank each of the members of the task force. You know, it's because of your belief in equity, justice, and our state's well-being that we've been able to make some progress. I know early on when we first got in a session, I wasn't so hopeful based on the makeup of the General Assembly, how much progress we might have been able to make, but thankfully we're moving the ball in the right direction. I am a little disheartened about the loss of the family disclosures in Senate Bill 300. We worked hard with that with the Legislative Black Caucus to get that language in there. I know Representative Morey and the Democratic minority leader in the House, Leader Reeves, are working hard as well as far as trying to get that language back in there. So hopefully before that bill gets to the Senate, the House floor, that language will be back in there to give families an opportunity to see their son, their daughter, their father, or someone in their final moments, instead of having to go into the court system to do that. But thank you all for your leadership.
I echo everything Senator Mohammed said. We're working hard. Everything is compromised. So I think we've made a lot of progress. Not ultimately what our recommendations are, but they're steps in the right direction. And the other thing that I think is so important is getting these young children out of the juvenile delinquency system. It passed 2 committees unanimously. but it keeps getting sidelined by one of the members and leadership in the House. We're still going to be working on it. And I hope that'll come to a floor vote soon to try to raise the age to at least 10 without any carve outs. But we're working hard, and thank you all for your support, and we're not going to give up.
Representative Murray, Senator Mohammed, we are all so appreciative of your hard work down there. Having been there for a number of terms myself, I know that it's a tough row to hoe, and y'all are out there working every day. And so thank you so much. And Bradford, very helpful report. I think my assessment is very much like the senator and representative. Is it everything that we asked for of our 25 top recommendations? No, but I think none of us were deluded to think we were going to get all of them. Are there meaningful improvements to the criminal justice system in these various pieces of legislation that are moving? And I think the answer is clearly yes. And it's through the hard work of our members and their allies in the legislature. And I do want to say that this has been a bipartisan issue. And I'm really pleased that this is something where Republicans and Democrats are working together. You know, there's so many issues where we are divided, Democrats and Republicans. And it's affirming that we can set those labels aside and get to work on issues that are going to make a difference in people's lives. And so thanks everybody for their great work on this. Does anyone on the task force have questions for either Representative Maury, Senator Mohammed, or Bradford, or Tally in Maine?
General Stein, this is Tally. I'll just echo what you said. I think that, well, first of all, I just want to thank you and the staff and all the leadership for really thinking this through and understanding that the legislative committee was just one avenue for the recommendations of this task force, and how important it was to really think it through with the executive, the judicial branch, but also local, and then also thinking about sort of a long-term strategy with communications and data. And I think that combined with what I've been really, really grateful for is the bipartisan sort of approach that everyone's taken. And I think that for long-term sustainability, that makes a lot of sense. I think all of us have some frustration and disappointment that not everything that we see as critical is going to happen right away. But I think, I just can't say enough about how folks have worked in all the different levels, but particularly with bipartisan leadership to make these things happen. So I'm just very grateful.
Very, very helpful comments, Tally. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, this is Kerwin. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please. No, Kerwin, please go ahead.
So I just wanted to jump in real quick and just say that the special prosecutor provision within the bill, even though it didn't make it, and I know you guys will continue to strategize about the implementation of getting that put in, but that is extremely important. And though it didn't make it this session, maybe the short-term session, we could really everybody put their heads together to try to figure out how we can get this piece and component pushed through, because it's extremely important. And also the release the body camera provision that was pulled the other day. I am kind of glad it was pulled, though I would like for it to go back to the original language that the bill came in. Even when that particular piece with the original language, though, if we could maybe look at the component around the provision where the family will not be able to disclose, because it kind of gags them from being able to say anything. And we've seen that this really worked wonders within the Andrew Brown case, the family being able to actually describe what they're seeing. And so that's a piece that's kind of concerning for me. So maybe some strategy around implementation of that piece as well.
To your first point about the special prosecutor in the small session, in the short session, I think that holds true not only on that provision, but on all the provisions Bradford mentioned that haven't advanced yet in the long session. I mean, if we don't get it today, it doesn't mean we're stopping. It just means that we're going to keep pushing and keep pushing until we do see the changes that we think are necessary. And I hear what you're saying about the body cam footage, both on the gag language. And I mean, to me, the most critical part of the body cam footage is that it be available to the public. The whole concept is that we have body cams to provide accountability on police citizen engagement from both perspectives, to hold the citizen accountable and to hold the police accountable. And we have an objective representation of what that interaction was. But if nobody other than the supervisor gets to see the footage, then it's not serving its full effect. And we absolutely should have body cam footage be a public record, in which case, if it's a public record, then the family will see it then too. It's just, it should be available to everybody. But I hear what you say about if a family sees it and then can't even talk about it, you know, how does that help them? So thank you, Kerwin. Justice Searles.
Yes, thank you. I had a question for the committee members broadly, and this kind of flows from my commitment to the initial executive order that mandates that we be evidence-based. And I'm just wondering if for any of these legislative efforts, whether some of the new proposals that have come up, whether there's any research or information that as a task force we could be helpful in gathering that would be useful in these efforts. And I guess, for example, what comes to mind, and this may be no longer necessary or relevant because the provision has been pulled, but on the body cam footage question, when I saw what was proposed, the first thought that came to my mind was, have they looked at what the practice has been so far? If the proposal is that judges make the decision, has anyone looked at what decisions judges have made up until now? And so that, to me, that's just an example, just to give you an example of, is there any new research or data that the task force could be trying to gather that would be useful in your efforts? And you don't have to answer right now, but I just raised that.
Well, I think it's an important point that we should, and Kerwin, I invite you to come to our next committee meeting. I'm a little confused if it's this coming Friday or not, but a week from today. But I think that this is an important discussion that we should put on the committee's agenda to continue this discussion on these provisions.
And if I could add, Kerwin, I'm right with you. You were at the committee meeting. We have drafted an amendment to go to rules to put the original Senate Bill 300 language in, which gives families the right to see it if law enforcement doesn't object without going to court. It's a great improvement. I think what Attorney General Stein said, we could have a floor amendment to open it up as a public footage and release. So we're going to keep going and keep pushing the issue. I think what Justice Earl said, to try and find any prior court decisions and how they go, which I think they go more to not disclosing than they do to disclosing, would be important information. But thanks, we're going to follow your lead.
Anyone else on any of the legislative issues? Okay, we will now go to Committee 4. Commissioner Mike Hawkins is going to update us on the local policy work.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Attorney General. And I will, normally we would be having Jeff Welty do this. He's out of town, actually out of the country today. So I'm going to pinch hit for him and tell you a little bit about what we're doing. I don't think we will take the whole 15 minutes, but we will look at the 4 different buckets that we're engaged in and talk about a couple of things in each bucket. I want to begin, if I could, just by mentioning the people who are on this committee, because they've been doing a ton of work over the past few months and wanted to mention them by name. They're Angelica Wynn from Asheville, Deborah Dix Maxwell from Wilmington, Jeff Smythe from Burlington, and Ronnie Smith from Robertsonville. So they're from all over the state, different parts of the state. as well as the staff people who are working with this committee, which again, Jeff, I mentioned Jeff, but also Jasmine McGee and Greg Saban and Holly Jones. And all of those people have been doing an awful lot of work and will continue to be doing an awful lot of work over the upcoming months. The other general thing I want to say before I get to the slides is that our committee, at this point, our overarching philosophy right now is we think a big part of what we should be doing right now involves communication and awareness. That if we can get out into the state at the grassroots level and talk about the different recommendations, not just the ones that are directly related to local government and local law enforcement, but generally with all of the recommendations, we think that will provide positive benefits for every committee as we move forward, and maybe help Senator Mohammed and Representative Murray, in the next session to get some of these other things done that we look to do. So with that preface, we have 4 buckets, and I will if we could get the slides up, we will begin with the law enforcement bucket. And I'm not going to read the bullet points for you. You can read the bullet points. What I want to do is maybe highlight 1 or 2 things on each slide. The first thing I'd mention on this bucket is the people involved. The people in this subcommittee doing this work is Jeff Smythe and myself and Jeff Welty from staff. And the thing that I'd want to really highlight on this slide is the concept of a law enforcement advisory committee. And that came up in one of our committee meetings, talking about could we get some broad expertise across different geographic areas, across different types of law enforcement in the state, talking about some of these recommendations. It wasn't, I'd like to be able to claim it as our committee, it was our idea. It wasn't. It was really the co-chair's idea to say, is this something that might be useful? So that committee has been formed. There's about 8 or 9 members of that committee. As I say, they're from different parts of the state. They're from different functional areas: municipal police, municipal law enforcement, county law enforcement, state law enforcement. And we have, and we're using them as a sounding board for recommendations. We've had 1 meeting already. We're intending on meeting monthly. And this is not just for the local committee. Any of the committees, if you have issues or questions that you think it might be useful to get some thoughts from this diverse group of people, please let us know. We can either bring it up as part of the meeting ourselves, or we can invite you to please join us in our meetings and you have the conversations with them as well. But we're excited about that. We think that that's going to be a really positive thing going forward and going to help us an awful lot going forward. So next slide, which is the local government subcommittee. And the members of that subcommittee are myself, along with Ronnie Smith, who is the chairman of the Martin County Board of Commissioners, as well as Mitch Colvin, who is the mayor of Fayetteville. We also have 2 staff members who are working in this, Greg Saban and Holly Jones. The thing that I would want to highlight, I think, on this slide would be something that Attorney General Stein talked about at the beginning of the meeting, is this outreach, this speaking outreach that has started. And it really did kind of start organically. We got an invitation. Someone reached out to Holly about coming to speak. So we have developed a presentation oriented toward the local recommendations that we have now given 3 or 4, maybe 5 different presentations. Angelica, myself, Holly, and Judge Thornburg has helped with a presentation to a legal conference. They have been very positive. I can tell you that people are engaged with this, and we have gotten tremendous feedback, and a lot of good conversation has taken place. Holly and I did one just last night with the Council of Governments, the Mid-East Council of Governments, which covers, I believe, Pitt County and Martin County and Bertie and Hertford, kind of that strip of Mid-Eastern North Carolina. And the one last night was tremendous. The elected officials on that call were very engaged and had a lot of good comments and very enthusiastic about what TREC is trying to accomplish across the state. I would also mention briefly that we have a tremendous opportunity next month in terms of outreach, because thanks to Ronnie Smith, who is president of the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, we have been allocated a segment in their annual conference. We've got a 75-minute segment in the annual conference of the NCACC next month in Wilmington. Jasmine McGee has worked really hard putting a presentation together. We think it's going to be very good. And again, with this concept, this goal of trying to raise awareness and communicate with local people so that we can get that kind of grassroots support to help us do not just the local stuff, but all of the recommendations that TREC is trying to advance. So the next slide would be our third bucket, which is the victim and communities bucket. And the members of that committee that work on that are Deborah Dix Maxwell and Angelica Wind and Jasmine McGee. The item that I'd want to highlight here is kind of ties into, again, something Attorney General Stein was talking about earlier in terms of having policy sheets put together. And we're working on one with restorative justice and violence prevention. And I really actually asked Jasmine if she would mind just briefly bringing us up to speed on that as an example of something we're doing in that area. Jasmine?
Sure. Starting last week, we started having meetings with both restorative justice programs and violence prevention programs across the state. Fortunately for our schedule, but unfortunately for the state, there are not a ton of these programs right now. And so we really think we're going to be able to talk to a lot of different people who are already doing this work. And our goal is to sort of, and you'll see a pattern developing here, create kind of an advisory panel of folks that can help us think through what some of the best practices are, what some of the key information people need to know to start these programs, to get people excited about these programs in the local communities. It also ties in very closely to the ARP sessions that you already heard about. And so we started those conversations. We're going to be continuing them through the summer. And both violence prevention and restorative justice will be not model policies, because there's a lot of different ways that you can implement these programs, but more kind of information sheet, best practices, information that we hope to get out and help spread across the state. Coming out of those meetings, the other thing that we know that we need to do is engage with victim advocacy groups and eventually the victim advisory panel, which was a recommendation of the task force. We wanted to make sure we had something meaty to share and discuss in our implementation of those recommendations before we started that next phase. But that is what this bucket has been working on. Angelica, anything you want to add? Okay.
No, other than the fact that I really appreciate that the community is, my interaction with the community is that they are very open and excited about this work, and they just want to keep hearing more. And I'm extremely grateful for Jasmine and everyone else that has been able to tie everything as it relates to restorative justice and other pieces in our bucket across the state. Super excited tomorrow to participate or hear in more a little bit about what other restorative justice programs are doing. But I certainly commend everyone as part of our committee. Great work. And thank you, Mike, for leading it.
But that did remind me of one thing that we did learn when we met with Restorative Justice Durham, that they are going to be having a Restorative Justice 101 session tomorrow morning on Zoom. So we'll drop the link to that in the chat as well, in case anyone's interested in a primer on restorative justice.
Thank you, Jasmine.
All right, thank you, Jasmine and Angelica. And so let's go to the last bucket then, which is really being worked on by one person, a staff person, but it's an extremely important bucket, and it involves grant making and funding and financing these things. I mentioned that we had that meeting last night with the elected officials of those counties in Eastern North Carolina, and that was wasn't the first thing, but it was an important thing that came up in the conversation is, this is great. We're all for it. We have limited resources. We have limited financial resources. We have limited human resources. And so we need to be creative, particularly in rural North Carolina. We need to be creative about how we can go about trying to implement some of these things on the local level. Holly did a really good job talking about the workshops that Justice Earls mentioned at the beginning of the meeting today regarding the American Relief Act, opportunities that you might be able to access, governments might be able to access in that regard. But it just emphasizes the point that on the local level, especially, a lot of things that we're talking about involve dollars and local dollars that sometimes local communities, particularly in the rural part of the state, have trouble bringing to bear on the problem. So that's something that Holly's doing a lot of work on, and the other members of the committee as well are doing some work on that. So again, I would reiterate that a big part of what we're doing right now is trying to have this communication, trying to have, and it's a two-way communication. It was mentioned earlier about surveys that we have done over the past couple of weeks. Well, the local policy committee, particularly in the law enforcement end, has done surveys with law enforcement regarding 2 or 3 different topics: community policing, off the top of my head, I believe SROs as well. So the point being, it's an interactive thing. We're not just communicating; we're listening too. But I would like to end by saying I'm just really impressed with both the members of this committee for the amount of work that they've been doing, but also the staff members who have really devoted a ton of time to pushing these recommendations forward. And I'm happy to be able to work with them. So with that, if there are any questions, I'm sure Jasmine would love to answer them.
Anyone have any questions for the local committee? Well, I want to reiterate what Mike said. I just want to express my appreciation to all the task force members for their continued engagement. That developing the recommendations, in some ways, as tough as that was, is the easy part, right? Actually implementing them is hard work, and it takes persistent work, and it requires multifaceted approaches. We need to look to the legislature, but it's not just the legislature. We need to look to the judiciary, but it's not just the judiciary. It's executive branch, it's the local governments, and you all are committed to this work. I know that Justice Earls agrees with my appreciation of you for that. And I'll just say a word just like Mike did, Jasmine, Natalia, Sam, and all of the DOJ staffers who are working on this. It really helps to have captains leading this way, and you all are doing a tremendous job keeping us focused and strategic. All the work that has been identified and discussed today, it all is moving something forward in a constructive fashion, and that requires a lot of both strategic thought, but also organizational ability to keep it moving in a effective way. And so thank you guys, staff, for keeping us on task, because really it's impressive and appreciated. Mike, just want to say, if you make it over to Dolly's for ice cream around lunchtime, you'll see my daughter. She's leaving camp today, heading home. So
I will make a point. That gives me 2 reasons to go eat ice cream at Dolly's today then.
Excellent.
I do have one question that doesn't relate to ice cream, but what I wonder is on the question of funding, as I've been thinking about, it is so true that not only getting these programs underway, but also figuring out how they can be sustainable. So one thing about the ARP funding is it's one-time funding. So localities have to think about how are they going to sustain, even if they get, say, a co-responder model set up, how are they going to sustain it over time? But the other thing that strikes me is that a lot of what we're talking about, a lot of the things that we're suggesting implementing actually in the long run save money. So I'm thinking about Sheriff Dance, who talked about how they are just beginning to get underway a co-responder model there. But what they're seeing is that when they have wraparound services for people who call them out and say have a mental health issue, if they didn't have that social worker who was then going out and connecting that person with resources in the community, they would be going back to that residence 2 and 3 times. And what I worry is that we haven't figured out how to capture the ways in which these innovations and these interventions are actually ultimately saving money as well. So I know that's a big picture, there's no quick answer, but that just seems important to me that we keep in mind that a lot of what we're talking about will in the end save money, and we should be touting that.
Anyone else have any comments for the local or any of the work that we're doing on implementation? All right, hand it off to Justice Earls for the next section.
Thank you. Well, we are now going to have the public hearing portion of our meeting, and I first want to make sure that everyone who's been attending and putting comments in the chat, we are recording those comments, and while you may not see us on screen responding directly to your comments, we acknowledge them and we are taking them into account and we have them. So thank you, and feel free to continue to comment. We have 4 people signed up, and we have ample time in the rest of our meeting. So I'm actually going to suggest, unless my co-chair both says not to do this, that we allow people up to 5 minutes for your comment. I'm going to cut you off right then, but and you don't have to take the full time, but I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to express to us what you have come to this meeting to let us know about. So with that, Maria Perry is the first person signed up to speak, and I would welcome you to raise your hand. We'll promote you to being able to be on screen with us. Okay, great, go ahead.
Good morning, and thank you all for your time, concern, and patience in hearing me out. This task force, along with the NC House Select Committee on Law Enforcement, Community Relations, and Justice, both consider NC law enforcement's participation in the federal civil asset forfeiture program. The House Select Committee recommended ending our state and local law enforcers' participation in this program, whereas this task force recommended a cash minimum. I believe the different outcomes evidence the need for further discussion of this matter within this task force, with such a discussion starting with the constitutional protections of due process of law and the right to be secure in one's person, place, and effects against warrantless searches and seizures, and those not supported by probable cause. The discussion amongst this task force last year centered around the premise that carrying a certain amount of money is inherently suspect. Therefore, law enforcers should be allowed to seize currency from people who are not charged with a crime. If law enforcement has probable cause to believe a crime occurred, they should be held to their duty to investigate and charge it using the criminal statutes our lawmakers have put into place. I would hope this committee also revisits this topic to discuss how people of color are disproportionately affected by civil forfeitures and how no judge is normally involved in reviewing most civil forfeitures because the forfeiture usually happens administratively. i.e. by the federal agency that is trying to forfeit the asset that the state or local law enforcer has given them. Chapter 75D of our state law provides a similar process our state and local law enforcers could use to accomplish civil forfeiture if they so desire. However, under our law, if forfeiture were successful, the seized cash would be directed to our schools, not back to the seizing agency, as is the case with the federal forfeiture process. If the intent is to really deprive so-called criminals of their assets, thereby crippling their enterprises, why won't state and local law enforcers use our own Chapter 75D, which our AG would be responsible for prosecuting, or charge a crime based on probable cause and use our criminal statutes? Finally, if the federal civil forfeiture process is in fact allowing state and local law enforcers to fight crime here, there should be facts and figures to support that claim and transparency to the public so that we can gauge the veracity of this claim. Anecdotes and supposition about the carrying of currency in certain amounts being inherently suspect does not equal probable cause and does not pass constitutional muster, especially when we consider the disparate impact that civil forfeitures have on people of color, low income, and low resource communities. In addition, people who have previously been convicted of a crime and who may be living the correct life now, who've turned their life around, they tend to be targeted with civil forfeitures, and their criminal background, even though they're not currently involved in anything, tends to be used against them. So I would hope that matters like these are considered in a debate about whether or not this task force would recommend that civil asset forfeitures continue. Thank you all for your time and listening to me today.
Thank you, Ms. Perry. And if you have those comments in written form, I would encourage you to email them to us so we have them as well. But thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. Our next speaker is Daniel Bose. If you will promote you to panelist. And Daniel, if you want to turn your camera on, perfect. All right.
Good morning. Let me first thank members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. As Justice Earl said, my name is Daniel Bose. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Policy at the ACLU of North Carolina. You know, I want to start by just praising several TREC members for how doggedly they've fought for policy change at the legislature. You know, I've seen Representative Morey fight in committee rooms, I shouldn't say fight, but push hard in committee rooms, push her Democratic colleagues hard, push Republicans hard, and just generally work aggressively to against all the forces that are keeping these policies from being implemented, and that will continue to do that. You know, the more meaningful the reforms become. And so I want to thank Representative Morey. Senator Muhammad is really the force behind Senate Bill 300 in supporting Danny Britt. And want to thank Senator Muhammad for that. And then Kerwin, you know, has been a person who's walking the halls over there, was at the committee meeting that we were talking about earlier about the body cam provisions. And so I do want to start off by thanking many members of this committee for the amount of effort that they are putting in and that they're battling for good ideas. You know, I'll also urge the committee to continue to fight. And I think one way to do that is to privately and publicly identify and confront good actors, bad actors in the process, a good actor that's making a bad decision. And I think there are plenty of those, because this is, as Attorney General Stein said, a bipartisan issue. And so I think it is worthwhile to praise Senator Danny Britt, Republican out of Robinson and Columbus County, for the leadership that he's shown on these issues and the inclusive way that he's gone about the process. I think it's good to talk about where Representative Stevens, who has been problematic on on virtually all the criminal justice bills I can think of, has been not someone who I look forward to engaging with for many reasons, but has shown restraint in how she's handled Senate Bill 300. So, praise her for that, but then be willing to criticize her for where she's not doing what she should be doing or being as supportive. And so I think that's important, but really that leads to my main point, which would be that I think it's crucial for this committee to highlight, that the governor and the agency staff that he leads are not where they need to be on this. That the agency staff and the agency liaisons are really the people who can make the difference here. And that's who I think is really sort of missing from this aggressive outreach effort, are those liaisons who, instead of promoting the recommendations, what we see is, for example, with the Department of Public Safety, they're out there promoting bills like House Bill 560 that create more mandatory minimums and tack on sentences to people's prison times of mostly Black individuals, and limit due process rights when property is destroyed in prison. And so really, asking Governor Cooper to be a better leader on these issues and really give the committee members, who are oftentimes fighting, the political support that they need to really make a difference. And so I hope that the committee members continue to push that issue. I also hope, and I'll close on this, is that we are never going to get where we need to be in terms of achieving racial equity in the criminal justice system as long as we continue to, this group and the legislature and the Attorney General's office and the governor's office and virtually all the institutions I'm aware of continue to defer to the North Carolina Sheriff's Association and the North Carolina Conference of DAs, who are not willing to embrace transformative change, and so need to be identified and confronted as bad actors in this conversation. And I hope that as that becomes more and more apparent to this committee and to the public, as we hit a wall with the policy implementation, I hope that members of this committee are willing to, again, privately and publicly confront good and bad actors. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. That was exactly 5 minutes. I really appreciate you being here with us and giving us that perspective. Our third person for the public hearing is Kathy Greggs.
Hello, my name is Kathy Greggs. I'm the co-founder and president of Fayetteville Police Accountability Community Task Force. First, I would like to say thank you all for allowing me to come and do this public comment for the people, by the people. I also want to give thanks out to those that attended our Facebook Live on Fayetteville PAC's page to give us updates on the governor's task force recommendations. Today, I'm here to first, let's make sure that we understand that though we're uprising the politics on so far as the Senate Bill 300 and everything else, let's make sure that we understand that politics has nothing to do with policing. I don't care what affiliation you are or whatever you do when it comes to being affiliated with certain groups or organizations. Where I care about is the people. With these recommendations, I see nothing about qualified immunity, which will hold the police accountable, as well as our AG accountable for DA's misconduct. So I feel as though that these recommendations and our public comments that we have been giving on for the last 18 months has not been really implemented in these recommendations. There's also some issues with immigration and undocumented immigrants that's not in these recommendations as well. Though I praise the fact that you guys are working really hard to try to fix this problem, at the end of the day, I just want to know exactly what you guys are doing. And though we have some people at the General Assembly trying to get this legislative going, I really think that the work should definitely come from a little bit harder aspect because right now we are still in this pond water. We haven't moved. even though this is a post-slavery state. And I wholeheartedly believe that having civilian police oversight authority, where the police is away from the actual citizens to make decisions or reprimanding the police officers, is highly suggested. And that also helps with eliminating qualified immunity, because we won't have to keep paying these bills that the police are doing misconduct on. We also need to do some DA removals in this recommendation, and how this should look as well. DA removals across the whole state of North Carolina. We know that the process is very hard to do that, but I think implementing some more actual policies and hold hardship on state bar legislators, especially special prosecution, to eliminate them to be a part of certain cases where there is a conflict of interest, will definitely plays a huge part in these recommendations. I thank you for your time, and you have a great day.
Thank you, Ms. Griggs. We appreciate your comments. And our final public hearing participant is Carolyn Graham.
Justice Charles, I believe that Ms. Graham has dropped off, unfortunately.
Yeah, I also don't, I can't see her name either. So we will get in touch with her, and she can either obviously sign up for another session or possibly submit something in writing. So again, I am grateful to the folks who have given us the benefit of their input. I think it's really important, and I really value the fact that you've taken your time to share your perspectives with us. I think that concludes our task force meeting. And I do want to open the floor. Does any task force member have any new business, anything that you want to raise with us? Yes, Representative Morey.
Thanks. And, I think the public comment is really important. Daniel Bose has been exquisite over at the General Assembly, and he's done a wonderful job. And he's brought up, some very important things to look at. I mean, in the budget, the Sheriff Association, a nonprofit, has $1 million earmark to help them lobby the General Assembly. That's really mind-boggling. And the Sheriff's Association was deferred to answer all the questions about the body cam changes. We need to be aware of that. One thing that I think we have not touched on that we also need to be aware of with DPS, our parole commission is deeply underwater. I had a conversation with a parole psychologist. They have one psychologist who's a year behind in doing interviews with people who are trying to get MAP releases. And there's no request in the budget to help get a parole analyst and a psychologist. And if these people would be eligible to be considered for parole, and we are severely underfunding our parole commission, we have a serious problem. And I think that's something TREC should look into, because it is disproportionately affecting our minority population, and they have a right to get a psychologist evaluation, an analyst to look at it, and be ready for a parole review hearing as soon as possible. And I hope that is something that we can put on our agenda. I will argue for that to get in the House budget, but I just wanted to bring that up as a new item of consideration. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or anything they want to bring to our attention? Well, I will then turn things back over to you, Attorney General Stein, to wrap us up.
I'll reiterate my words of appreciation. Was someone just speaking? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm really sorry. I think Natalia is trying to jump in to say something and her microphone isn't working, so I'm going to speak in her place. We have a quick poll for the task force members that are here regarding the possible sort of format for the October meeting, sort of just your preference in terms of doing that in person, virtually, or if at this time you're just unsure. But I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll so y'all can vote, so we can start planning for that next meeting. Natalia, I hope that was sufficient.
Thank you, Natalia through Ellen. Well, if anyone has voting, If anyone has if no one has any other comments, just really want to say thank you all for your attention, and more importantly, thank you for the great work that you do between these full task force meetings. It's clear we're making a lot of progress. It's not always observable to the general public, but I am proud and know of the progress that we're achieving together. And so thank you all very much.
We're all good.